Hi everyone, I'm Maia, and this presentation sums up part of my master thesis. I'm really grateful to the organizers of the VMST, especially to Professor Matthew Brown, for the opportunity to join virtually. I'm speaking from Brazil, from the Federal University of Minas Gerais, city of Belo Horizonte, the one in the picture you are seeing now. A recent topic in philosophy of science regards concepts that mix evaluative and descriptive elements, and the consequences of this mix for those measures that aim to operationalize them. Here, I investigate values, non-epistemic values, in poverty concepts and measures, especially measures from economics and sociology. Among economists and sociologists that study poverty, it is widely accepted that these concepts and measures involve values. Studying values in concepts of poverty made me know two other issues. First, the diversity of concepts and measures of poverty that are taken seriously in economics and sociology. Two, the different purposes that concepts and measures of poverty in economics and sociology usually answer. I argue that poverty concepts and measures are functions of our moral and political values as well as of their purposes of their use in scientific research and especially use in public policy. This results in a pluralism about these concepts and measures. As we find in society a variety of purposes and values, there is no single concept or measure that is absolutely superior to any other, or so I argue. Here I present an objection to moderate monism, one of the strongest alternatives to pluralism about concepts and measures of poverty. Moderate monism is the practice of taking income-based measures as our main benchmark in poverty analysis. My objection is that moderate monism poses a great risk, the risk of losing sight of alternative pictures and diagnoses regarding poverty. This happens even when one anchors the income-based measure in the most powerful version of the welfare's concept of poverty. That concept and its corresponding measure run the risk of failing to make justice to all our evaluative, moral, and political concerns and purposes involved in poverty research. If even this monism is insufficient, then we have good reason to embrace pluralism, or so do I argue. To do this, I first introduce one sense in which poverty is a thick concept, that is, a concept that mixes evaluative and descriptive elements, and how evaluative elements may enter poverty measures. Then I present the argument against moderate monism. I conclude by addressing consequences that this pluralism has for public policies against poverty. Alright, poverty as a thick concept. What does it mean to say that poverty is a thick concept? The uses of the notion of thick concept in mathematics are many and increasingly sophisticated. They are not my focus here. Instead, I focus on the literature on philosophy of science, where I identify many uses of this notion. However, here I restrict myself to only one of them. The German philosopher Neuhauser gives us an analytical scheme of the concept of poverty that can help us to see more clearly the sense of thickness that interests me. Adapting his scheme a little, a poverty is the fourfold relation where P has less than a level L of S in relation to M, where P is the person who is in poverty, S is the good that the poor person doesn't have, it is their deprivation space, L refers to the threshold or the poverty line, M is the standard against which poverty is measured. Neuhauser's analysis provides us with a way to identify people in poverty. But when we talk about poverty measures, we also need to define two other things. What is our IN, that is our indicator of S, and how we are going to gather the information about the possibly many poor persons, that is how are we going to aggregate them. It is possible that IN and S be the same, for example that our S is money and so is the indicator. For the most part, however, the indicator will be a proxy of S. For example, income will be a proxy of the welfare space. Thus, through a first approximation, a poverty measure can be seen as putting together three elements: identification, indicator, and aggregation. Both in defining the concept and in constructing its measure, we need to choose which will be our S, M, IN, and A. You can see some of the candidates for the answer to each element on the slide. Each of these choices is evaluative, and this is one sense that poverty and its measures are thick. Concepts and measures are scientific tools or products aimed primarily at describing phenomena. If they require the researcher to make choices, then the description which deploys them is an act of choice. As Matthew Brown points out, it is reasonable to assume that choices involve contingencies. That is, for the same phenomenon, many and not only one concept of measure are available. We may say that the social word is not enough for us to describe poverty. We need some criteria, which are our values and purposes, to choose a concept and build the measure that captures it. These choices imply the researcher and users of the concept and measures have a responsibility in doing so. That descriptions involve choices doesn't necessarily imply pluralism. In the case of poverty, the social word may not tell us exactly which concept and measures to choose, but we may have other reasons, theoretical or practical, that lead us to consider one concept or measure superior to all others. That is, we may have other reasons to be monist about this concept and its measure. Against moderate monism. There are many arguments against monism. For instance, we may point out the limits that each discipline imposes on the study of poverty. In this case, for instance, standard microeconomics may be insufficient to account for all the dimensions of poverty, as the importance of social needs, the institutional and political dimensions and processes involved in social exclusion, and etc. Actually, this is Peter Townsend's perspective, an influential sociologist that put forward a measure of poverty that is also thicker, in the sense of being descriptively and contextually richer than its alternatives. This is another sense of thickness, by the way. Those concepts that have more descriptive content than more abstract ones. Among the many aspects that constitute the phenomenon of poverty, we may be more interested in the ability of concepts and measures to figure in explanatory and predictive theories of poverty. Certain concepts and measures may be better suited for interests in the causal aspects of the phenomenon, its dynamics, and the effects of certain interventions. This purpose motivates the research program inaugurated by Townsend. On the other hand, we may be mainly concerned with capturing those elements that are most salient from the point of view of our moral and justice concerns, and with ensuring that our concepts and measures reflect these concerns adequately. This is what guides Sand's capability approach. Now my focus here is different. One of the best monist strategies, this is my focus now, is to broaden the standard welfarist version of poverty and its corresponding measure. According to welfarism, the S of the concept of poverty should be welfare, which is identified with utility. Hence, poverty is deprivation of welfare or utility. Utilities are understood here as what people maximize through their choices. We should note that the best welfarist analysis already assumes the evaluative nature of concepts, measures, and analysis of poverty. This is not in question. Actually, the main normative concern of welfarism is to respect individuals' preferences, which are expressed by their consumption behavior, that is, all the commodities that people choose to consume. Welfarism takes individuals' income as the indicator M of welfare, and the measure most deployed of it is the monetary measure of poverty. The poor are those who have an income below a given threshold, for instance, $1.90 a day. Among some of the main advantages of the monetary measure is the fact that it is consistent with standard micro theory. This means we can draw consequences for explaining and predicting the behavior of poor people, at least from the point of view of microeconomics. Another advantage is that information about income is widely available through household surveys. However, there are problems. One may reject microeconomics standard theory. Second, access to individuals' real income requires a series of imputations by researchers. Surveys collect information about households, not about individuals. Differences between their members, children, women, men, the elderly, and the distribution of their resources are not transparent. Also, there are differences in prices. All require imputations more or less based on still controversial theories. And last but not least, even if we had direct access to individuals, we know that they don't have equal capabilities to convert income into utility, nor are they in equal contexts. This means that for the same level of income, two individuals are likely to derive different levels of utility. This is the problem of heterogeneity. This problem led Amartya Sen to claim that commodities aren't the appropriate space as for poverty measures, nor not even welfare is the right space, because, he says, individuals can and do choose eventually to give up their welfare for reasons related to altruism, religiosity, politics, etc. The proper space, he argues, is individuals' capabilities, as capabilities reflect the effective freedom that each individual has to live the life he or she wants, and to pursue welfare and non-welfare related goals. Advocates of welfarism in poverty, such as Havalion, are aware of heterogeneity and put forward a broader conception of welfare, which would be able to overcome this informational problem. Another economist, Partha Dasgupta, follows a similar path. A note here, as they are still in the realm of rational consumer model, they don't address the problem of individuals giving up on their welfare. This is in itself may be a reason to add alternative approaches to welfarism. But let's leave this aside and assume that welfare is the best space of deprivation. Are welfarism and monetary measures capable of accounting for heterogeneity? Havalion thinks so. He argues for an interpretation of the capabilities approach that may be consistent with welfarism. In it, capabilities are direct generators of utility. This demands that, in addition to income, we need to look at prices and individuals' characteristics. This is improved welfarism, as it starts from the recognition that income isn't all that matters in assessing the state of an individual. Improved welfarism needs to show that one's capabilities depends at least in part on income, and to ensure that the poverty measure establishes a minimum income level that corresponds to minimum capabilities. The problem would no longer be a problem of the indicator in, but about the poverty line L. Using similar reasoning, Havalion argues that monetary measures would be able to map aspects related to individual social needs too. In fact, Havalion recognizes that monetary measures of poverty must be weighted against more direct indicators of capability deprivations, like nutritional indicators, or indicators regarding individual social exclusion, like employment indicators, and data that seek to measure welfare through subjective inquiries. This is his moderate monism. Despite these concessions, he still emphasizes the ability of market prices and related consumer preferences to reflect the individual's welfare, and the paternalistic risks associated with judgments that run against consumer preferences. This emphasis places monetary measures, at least in market economies, as the starting points of any construction of poverty measures and analysis. Other indicators are only correctives to an already established benchmark. Does this moderate monism hamper pluralism? I don't think so, and the reason is prudential. Taking monetary measures as the only benchmark implies a high risk that we fail to capture the other relevant dimensions of deprivation, even those that Ravalion's extended welfarism claims to account for. In fact, the now shared recognition that poverty is a multidimensional phenomenon, not reduced to income, was largely the result of studies on global, regional, and national level that showed how monetary measures and non-monetary measures may result in different poverty counts and may capture different individuals. These go against Havalion's spirit, as monetary measures should be taken as a benchmark because we should expect them to move in the same direction as non-monetary ones, or so he claimed. 3 examples illustrate this point. First one from Brazil, where Bourguignon and Chakravarty show how monetary and non-monetary poverty measures in the rural areas during the 80s followed different patterns. Income-based poverty increased, while educational poverty decreased. Second, Al-Khairi and Seth analyzed the evolution of income poverty and multidimensional poverty in India from 1990 to 2006. While nationally both measures pointed to a reduction, when analyzing patterns from geographic subgroups, they found the inverse pattern. Third, Nolan and Williams show that in 26 European countries, less than half of the income poor were also poor according to non-monetary indicators. This is a considerable mismatch in the identification of the poor. The mere possibility of this kind of divergence should be enough to alert us to the risk of taking monetary measures as the only benchmark, but the repetition of divergent results between monetary and non-monetary measures goes against the recommendation of modest monism. Instead, when non-monetary data is available, we should always base our analysis on both measures. This point resembles the literature on inductive risks and values in science. I don't have time to talk here about why I think the risks, in the case of poverty description, are not inductive, but the spirit of Rudner and Heather Douglas concerns is like mine. Rewording Rudner, how sure we need to be before we accept a measure of poverty will depend on how serious a mistake would be, and here the risks are quite high. The case of poverty measures illustrates, I think, an issue about measures of abstract concepts in general. When highly abstract, concepts and theories ask for middle-level theories to be meaningfully employed in more concrete measures and situations. In measures, this manifests itself through the use of proxies to capture concepts indirectly. Havallion's welfarist interpretation of capabilities and his defense that monetary measures capture them are an example of this. Given the abstract character of a concept such as welfare and utility, it is not possible to reject them a priori, as if they weren't necessarily capable of capturing relevant aspects of the capabilities approach. This is why I believe analysis about the adequacy or inadequacy of given information space, like income, resources, welfare, capability, for political and social analysis, and even for theories of justice, should be accompanied by operationalization efforts seeking to flesh out the concepts and thus reveal their implications or lack of for evaluations of concrete social states. The moral is that the indirect character of many measures cannot be an excuse for giving up efforts to check whether a measure adequately captures a concept. In conclusion, what consequences my pluralism has on public policy on poverty? First, let me be clear that there is consensus on several important issues related to poverty concepts and measures, including those related to public policy. I have already referred to the consensus about its multidimensional nature, which is materialized in international agreements, such as the Sustainable Development Goals. For instance, its Goal 1.2 states, quote, by 2030, we should reduce at least by half the proportion of people of all ages living in poverty in all its dimensions according to national definitions. The problem is that an emphasis on monetary measures often eclipses all other dimensions. For example, in Brazil, despite this goal, the measure related to Goal 1.2, the national measure related to Goal 1.2 has not yet been devised. The second consequence is that actually is already reflected in the literature that already recommends robustness and sensitivity tests in the construction of poverty measures and in analysis of their dynamics. However, these tests are usually conducted around the poverty line L and not around the choice of indicators in. Also, if there is a divergence between monetary and non-monetary measures, we will have to make moral and political decisions about which deprivation space to privilege in an eventual anti-poverty policy. All this seems to point to the importance of developing tools that help make explicit the evaluative decisions involved in poverty measures, and the possible divergent consequences that each one reveals for the picture of poverty in a context. This is especially the case for measures that serve as criteria for granting government benefits. Here the effort should be to include as many stakeholders, politicians, and especially the people in poverty themselves in the process as possible. The problem with monetary measures is that they make evaluative dimensions opaquer, given the impression that there isn't a decision to be made. This is one advantage of the capabilities approach. Measures based on it from the start are constructed to make salient their evaluative aspects, not only around S, M, in, and A, but in other aspects as well. In conclusion, you can see the references right here. Thank you so much.